Here we're going to start talking about percents. You have to keep in mind that percent means per hundred, or a number out of 100. So when we have to change a percent into a fraction, if we keep in mind 25% means 25 out of 100, that gives us the fraction 25 hundredths. Then we have to see if we can reduce it, because the directions do ask us to put the fractions in simplest form. So we have to divide 25 and 100 both by 25, and we would reduce the fraction down to 1/4. For 54% would mean 54 out of 100. Then we have to see if we can reduce. Well, we know 2 can go into both 54 and 100, so we divide them both by 2, and we get 27/50ths, which cannot be reduced, so that would be our answer. To change percents into decimals, you simply start with your decimal behind your whole number, 72, and you move the decimal point 2 places to the left. The decimal's now in front of the 72. Remember, percent means per hundred, so 72% would mean 72 out of 100, or 72 hundredths, which is the decimal here, 72 hundredths. 4%, decimal starts behind it, and we still move the decimal 2 places, even though it's a single-digit percent. Remember, percent means per hundred, and that's 2 decimal places. So we do have to add that 0 in there to get 4 hundredths. For 90%, the decimal goes there. We move it 2 places to the left, and the decimal goes in front of the 9. We can drop the 0 off the end, so we would get 9/10. The next lesson is the opposite. It's starting with the decimals and fractions and making them into percents. Well, to change a decimal to a percent, we have to do the opposite of what we just did in the last lesson, and we have to move the decimal to the right 2 times. The decimal's now here, which gives us a whole number, 39%. For 125,000, she can move the decimal 2 places to the right. The decimal's now there, and we get a decimal percent, 12 5/10%. To change 8/10 into a percent, you move the decimal 2 places to the right, add a 0 in the empty spot, and we would get 80%. One way to help you remember which direction to move the decimal is in these problems we need to make the decimal number into a percent, and we know percent signs always go behind the number. So remember, you're moving towards the percent sign because you want to make a percent. Whereas on the last lesson, we were trying to get rid of the percent, so we want to move the decimal away from the percent sign. One thing I forgot to point out here in this lesson, right here where we're changing these percents into decimals, we want to make sure that we don't leave percent signs behind these decimal answers. These are no longer decimals. I'm sorry, they're no longer percents, they are now decimals. So please don't keep the percent sign, and that is a mistake some people make. So I forgot to warn you about that our first time through. Okay, the second part of lesson 8 is changing fractions into percents. If you have a fraction like 11/25, where the denominator goes evenly into 100, the easiest thing to do is just make your fraction into hundredths. 25 times 4 is 100, 11 times 4 is 44, and that would then give us 44%, since 44 hundredths would be 44%. When we have one like number 6, however, we can't change 8 into 100 to make 7/8 into hundredths. So we're going to have to divide, and remember, it's always denominator into numerator. So we divide 8 into 7. Keeping in mind that in percent, we're going to need 2 decimal places, so we'll be able, for our decimals here, we need to be able to move it 2 places over in our answer to get our final percent. So we always have to start with 2 zeros, so we'll have our 2 decimal places to move. And then we just divide. Now when we get to here, we have 2 options. We can stop, since we have our 2 places to move over to get 87 and something percent, and bring our remainder up, put it over the divisor, and make a fraction. And when we reduce that, we would get 87.5%. Second option, even though I recommend the fraction option, stopping there, you can continue, keeping in mind your decimal point would now be there. Bring down a 0 and divide again. And that would give us 87 5/10%. So you can either do the fraction or the decimal method. If you have one like number 7 and you check, can 10 go into 100? Sure. So the quickest thing to do would be to change this fraction into hundredths. 10 times 10 is 100. 7 times 10 is 70. 70 out of 100 would be 70%. try one more like this. 11/16. Again, 16 can't go evenly into 100, so we're going to have to rely on our division. So we have to divide 16 into 11. We know that won't go, but we're going to add 2 zeros instead of just 1, since we know that we're going to have to move the decimal 2 places in the quotient to get our percent. 16 into 110 is 6. Oops. That would give us 96. Bring down the 0. And we have to do 6 into 140. That would be 8. Now at this point, again, we have 2 options. Once we get our 2 places to move over to create our percent, we can just put the remainder over the divisor and reduce that. And that would give us 68 3/4%. Again, that's the option I recommend because it eliminates some of the long division and less opportunities for mistakes there. And also, if you have a repeating decimal, you're going to have to come back to this point anyway to make a fraction. This one wouldn't be a repeating decimal, so if you did choose to continue, it would work. Again, however, with all of these extra steps, you're creating more opportunities for careless mistakes. I recommend stopping and making the fraction, but this decimal answer is the same thing, so that's fine too.